Hello, Marcus. How are you?
I am very well, Sam. Very well indeed. Deep in the heart of the British summer here, so we're having a lovely time. Yeah, have we got a guest on this week?
We do, of course, Marcus. We have another guest. Otherwise, people have to listen to us. That's the last thing they want to do. So we have with us Kirsten Luts from the Camera Shake podcast. Kirsten, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. And
Hi there,
as we usually do
Kirsten.
with guests, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Kirsten Luts. I'm a commercial portrait photographer based over here in London, or on the outskirts. Well, the burbs of London, I would say. And in the glorious leafy, hamlet of Hertfordshire. Like I said, I'm a commercial portrait photographer, which basically means I deal with headshots, businesses, actors, and so on and so forth. But I'm also the host of the Camera Shake podcast, which I've been running for the last 5 years now, believe it or not. And that's really what I do. And the podcast has taken over my life and my family's life by now.
And excellent, Marcus. How have we got Kirsten here? Well, how are we allowed another podcast on here? Surely this isn't right.
I've done Kirsten's podcast, and
So you've been a guest on it.
I've been a guest on his podcast.
Right, yeah.
I had a great time. It's a different format to our show. It's it's an hour and a half long, but Kirsten's a real expert in. He's not going to say this. He's had I think I look at your YouTube. You got 500 videos out there, which is your podcast and teaching videos as well. So I just thought, wow, this is what an expert who can talk about the benefits for photographers of using YouTube and podcasts to raise your profile.
Absolutely. It's a perfect platform in a sense. I mean, if you're a little bit extrovert, I think I would say, that really is kind of that's at the basis of it. But yeah, YouTube and podcasting, or video and podcasting in general, are forms of media that have become more and more important over the last 10 years. I've been in this business long enough to remember a time before YouTube, even, before smartphones, before YouTube. And podcasting, it's not that long ago. In fact, pre-pandemic, people used to go, podcast? I've heard of it. What is it? Where do you get that? And now everybody seems to be having a podcast,
Yeah. And so presumably for photographers, as we say with all marketing, you've got to think about who the audience is. So yeah, presumably you've got your podcast, I'm presuming is aimed at photographers, Kirsten. But obviously not all photographers want that, do they? Because for some photographers, they're doing training and they want their guests to be photographers. But for lots of photographers, they want other customers. So what sort of thing do you think kind of, a regular photographer, say commercial photographer or wedding photographer, whatever, could have as a podcast? Because obviously, talking about photography is great for photographers, but not if you're doing other types of photography.
First and really most important thing that you get to think about before you start anything like a YouTube channel or a podcast per se is actually, you've got to answer the question, why? Why are you doing it? What's your raison d'etre, basically? It could be that you want to attract more clients. That's a perfectly viable reason to start, a YouTube channel or a podcast or something like that. Or it could be that you have other reasons to do it. In my case, in particular, I started at the beginning of the pandemic because, in actual fact, my photography work had collapsed completely, from one day to the next, and I needed to do something creative. And I felt that, I wanted to have conversations with other photographers because, there wasn't. The reason behind it wasn't to grow an audience or to build it into anything. It was just literally to give myself structure during a time when there were extreme lockdowns happening over here in the UK, So I recorded an episode on a Monday, I edited it, I brought it out on a Thursday, and immediately my week had structure. And in doing that, I had all these fantastic conversations, and I realized that actually I learned a lot. I learned a lot from talking to some of the greatest photographers of our time. And so I realized that if I learned a lot, then my audience has the opportunity to learn, to join in and also learn a lot. And I kept getting more and more messages from listeners, especially, through over the first couple of years of the pandemic, and people saying, I love listening to the show once I'm editing. It just helps me, because I'm also a victim of the pandemic, and it was just, it was actually aimed at the community of photography or photographers, rather than a vehicle to get me new clients. What it has done, and this is of course one of the things, anybody who doesn't really have any idea about things like podcasts, anybody who's not involved in the creative field, or even my wife or something in the beginning, she's like, well, why are you doing this? Why are you spending so much time doing this? Like, is this paying you any money? Are you making any money with this? One of the biggest questions, like, do you earn money doing podcasts? And, for a very long time, the answer was no, I don't make any money. In fact, I spent money on subscriptions and this and that and the other, and I spent a lot of time on it. What it has done is it's opened up opportunities for me over time. So you can either, whether that's speaking opportunities at things like the photography show, or, it's taken me across the world to shows like Imaging USA, and I've met a lot of people, done a lot of collaborative projects, and it's opened up opportunities for me that have meant that I have been able to, gain financially, in a number of other, down another few avenues that are a direct result of the podcast. But the podcast is the vehicle that opens up these opportunities. So that's one way.
Okay, that's interesting, because it's really similar to, we were talking to Jeff Brown a while ago, and he was saying a very, very similar thing about books. He's written quite a few books, and he's saying, the books themselves, they don't sell that many, they don't make money themselves, but exactly the same. It's that vehicle, so that because you've got a book, because you've got the podcast, you're seen as the expert, so then it leads to all sorts of other things.
Absolutely. And, the truth of it is, nobody seems to be taking you serious. I mean, because like I said, it seems like everybody has a podcast. I found that, in the beginning, let's say, I don't know, when we did because I started with a friend of mine. And let's say when we had 40 episodes, we were super proud. We've made 40 of these episodes. Awesome. And people went, oh yeah, you've got a podcast. Okay, nice. Okay. I think when we hit 3 figures, I think when we hit sort of 100 episodes, that's when that's when people were starting to take us in the industry, was starting to take us more seriously, because then it was like, oh, okay, there's some serious work and effort, and dedication that's gone into it, and so really that's when it started. I mean, I've been doing it on my own now for the last 160 episodes or something, but that's really when the tide started to shift. So this is a marathon, as they say, not a sprint. And this is the thing, I think, that people have to bear in mind, no matter whether they, go into YouTube or podcasting, whatever. This is a marathon. This is a long-term, this is a long game, there's no immediate success. It's not the thing that happens overnight, it doesn't.
Well, I think these days all marketing is a long-term game, isn't it, Sam? I mean,
yes and no. There are some things you can do in the short term. So yes, usually the best stuff is the long term, and you build it, like Kirsten's saying. But there are as well often things you can do to kind of fill that gap while you're waiting, because you don't want to be saying, I'm waiting for the long term, but in the meantime, I've got no money. So there is often things you can do in the short term. You can always, Google ads are always a great one. You can always turn on the Google ads and people will arrive at your landing page. But yeah, it's expensive. But yeah, you can do things like that while you build something for the longer term, and the stuff you build in the long term does pay back really well over time, doesn't it? But you've got to put that time and effort and consistency in. I think we've got a whole show about consistency, haven't we? Because that is so important, isn't it, Kirsten, as part of
So the consistency is, again, it's this thing. It's about showing up, I've, in 270 episodes, I've missed, I believe, 2 weeks. One time because I was stuck on a mountain in Wales with during a storm, and the internet went down, and that was it. And the other time was actually when my co-conspirator, my friend Nick, who I started the podcast with, when after the pandemic, he had to go back into the workplace, basically. And, and
very inconvenient.
Well, I mean, it's one of these things. Yeah. I mean, we started during the pandemic and nobody knew, because in the beginning, if you remember, it was like, oh, this is going to be,
no one knew.
6 weeks.
We had no clue, did we?
No, exactly. And it took 2 years, you know.
I think that what you mentioned there, sharing the load, is a really good way. Something that I found, well, we've found, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
of
definitely.
helping you be consistent. And I was just thinking there of the photography shows that I listen to, and quite a lot of them are two people.
Yeah, it definitely has advantages. You know, it's true that sometimes you just need that little bit of motivation. You know, you need the other person to go, "Hey, come on, we got to do this. Let's do it." You know, even when you're feeling maybe a little bit demotivated or something like that. And of course, that's going to happen when you do something over a long
Yeah.
period of time. You're not always going to be switched on and ready to go. There are going to be moments where you maybe you feel a little bit under the weather, or or something in your life happens that's that you have to deal with. So and I think for me it was actually brilliant to start this this whole thing with Nick. And I remember this. I actually remember the conversation I had with Nick at the very beginning of the pandemic. This was literally like a few weeks in. My my diary had completely collapsed. I had virtually all my bookings. I used to do conferences at the time, and all my bookings had basically been cancelled. Because conferences were dead in the water, like literally from one day to the next.
Yeah.
And from a marketing point of view, of course, I made a cardinal mistake. I built my whole business on one pillar. It was. But if in 2019, if anybody had told you, the conference industry is going to collapse, you would have gone,
yeah, you thought they're mad, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So what could possibly happen? Well, a pandemic can happen. Nobody thought,
No.
And then it happened. And so, I realized a number of things. I realized, I didn't have any smaller business clients. I didn't have any local clients because all of my clients were the international corporates. So I had nothing to fill the gaps. And I watched a lot of Netflix for the first couple of weeks, and I did the Marvel movie marathon a couple of times. And then I really, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to do something creative. So I got on FaceTime with my friend Nick, and he was a filmmaker. He was in the same predicament. And so, we were talking about it, and we said, do you remember this idea about starting a podcast that we had, a few months ago? But when life is, going its normal course, then sometimes you have ideas and you kick them down the road, and it's just one of these things. And so I said, like, well, do you remember this podcast idea? This might be something to do for us now. And then of course you get into and I don't know if you had the same experience, but in the beginning you go, oh, this is a great idea. How does this actually work? Where do podcasts live? Like how do you get something on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? How does any of this work?
Yeah, I remember doing that research.
Yes, I'm still doing it.
Well,
did you, Kirsten? Did you go to YouTube straight away, or were you just doing voice only podcasts when you started?
For us, I mean, it was an absolute no-brainer. It was going to be a podcast about photography, which is a visual medium. So there was absolutely no question that this was going to have to be on a visual platform. I mean, there was no question about it. It was from the very first episode I went straight into YouTube and it wasn't that we thought that YouTube was going to be the right platform, but we didn't know, to be honest with you. But it was just a no-brainer. We had cameras.
And you did it with a filmmaker as well, so that would make perfect sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And so and I think at the end of that initial conversation, which was like a Friday afternoon, I said to Nick, like, look, man, because you get to this point where you start talking yourself out of a good idea, because you're coming up against obstacles, and you go like, oh, how do you do this? I don't know how to do that, and I have no idea how. And at some point I said to him, like, what are you doing on Monday at 4 p.m.? And he goes, well, nothing, because it's lockdown.
Nothing's happening.
So I'm stuck in the flat. So I said, cool, because Monday 4 p.m. is when we're going to hit record, and we're going to record the first episode, and we're just going to have to figure it out between now and then. And we called the first episode "Done is Better Than Perfect," because sometimes you just have to get stuff done, and you just have to accept that it's not going to be perfect. And
we have that conversation a lot, don't we, Marcus?
We do, and I've got to say, Sam is really good at it. I mean, obviously, being creative, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. Sam is great, and Sam, being a marketing person, is great at getting stuff out there, whether it be, and you need to have that.
Yeah, you just have to actually make a start, and then it's just a matter of showing up. And the thing that we realized also was, The first episode is going to be terrible, and it really was. I challenge anybody to go back and listen to the very first episode of the Camera Shake podcast, and you will agree with me. It is absolutely shocking. But we also figured that, if we made it to episode 10, most likely we would have learned a couple of things. And episode 10 is probably going to be better than episode 1. And episode 20 is going to be better than episode 10, and so on and so forth. And, we didn't know that we were going to, that we were going to make hundreds of episodes, but at the time anyway. But, things have, you go through a process of changing things and, trying out different things. And you have to, because that's what makes you a better podcaster. It's the same in photography. That makes you a better photographer. It's the same in marketing. You got to try different things. Some things work, some things don't. That's why as a marketer, you always adjust and amend, in order to get the best result.
No, and I think there's a few things with doing it other people, because I think often photographers do feel quite isolated. It partly can help with that, can't it? And what I found as well is not just that there's somebody else to pick you up, but also the fact that it's Thursday, it's 10:30. I should be doing a podcast, but often going, oh my God, there's this going on, there's that going on. But the fact that there's Marcus, I know, is about to jump on the call, it kind of forces you to do it too. Just that kind of, you kind of don't want to let the other person down. And that suddenly automatically, I think, steps you up a level, because that's very different to just letting yourself down. Like, oh God, I could just spend another hour on, editing my photos or doing my accounts. Well, suddenly there's my co-host sat there. I better bloody get on and do it. It is a big impetus to get on with it.
That's why I love having guests on the show, because that's my accountability. The reality is, when we first started the podcast, I mean, in no way would I have thought that, I would be able to get the guests on the show, the caliber of guests on the show that I managed to get on the show. This is totally true. At the very, very beginning, I made a list that I called the "Wouldn't it be cool if" list, and I just put names on there, pie in the sky, names that I thought would never in a million years agree to come on my little stupid show, right? People like Pete Sousa, Barack Obama's, photographer, or Scott Kelby, or you name it, you name it. Yeah, I mean, you name it, and and I've had them all on the show. Multiple times. It's like, how the heck did that happen? It's just it's persistence. It's accountability, and if somebody agrees to come on the show, and the reality of it is, I'm sitting in my front room recording this. I mean, I'm talking to a screen. This isn't like a big TV production or anything like that. If somebody out there agrees to give me a couple of hours of their time and allows me to ask them anything I want to ask them, then I've got to respect that, and I've got to commit. And that's the thing that makes me show up, ultimately, because somebody else is taking time out of their life. They don't have to do this. This is not paid, but to me, it's just I have to show the respect and show up. And, likewise, you build that relationship with your listeners over time, and if I say that, my show comes out on a Thursday at 2 p.m. UK time, which is in the morning North American time, people, form habits. They get into their car on a Thursday morning on the way to work, and they put on, they want to, listen to the latest, they're looking forward to the next episode. Yeah. And if I'm not there, if the episode is not there, I've caused disappointment, and I don't want to do that.
Nice. And they find something else, don't they? And so the next Thursday, they've got something else.
Absolutely.
And it's the same, isn't it, with your newsletter and with any of your other marketing? Some of those things that are just regular. Yeah, people know when to expect it, and that's very powerful.
It's like a TV program, back in the days of linear programming, do you remember? I mean, I'm old enough to remember the days when, you had to wait for a whole week for the next episode of something, right? And and imagine if I remember this as a kid. Just remember, like, you sit in front of the TV, you turn the thing on. It's 7 p.m. on a Thursday or whatever, and you watch it. You're waiting for the next episode of Magnum PI. That's how old I am. Magnum PI to come on, and it's not there, and you go, what?
Yeah.
What's happening? And that's the reality of it. So I think when you decide to, and this is the thing. Did you guys know? You probably know this. but maybe for the listeners, it's interesting. Do you know what the average lifespan of a podcast is in terms of numbers of episodes?
I know it's under 10 episodes. I can't remember
It's
exactly. Is it like 7?
It's 7 episodes.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's the average. Okay.
that is the
The
average. Exactly. Unbelievable.
Just on the minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So just with that, so Kirsten, obviously, look, we've hopefully sowed the seeds in our listeners and viewers now minds about the benefits of putting together a podcast or a YouTube channel. Maybe just 1 or 2, or maybe 3 tips on putting together something that you've learned over the years that you can help.
Sure, consistency is one, absolutely without a shadow of a doubt. That's the most important thing. The other thing is the why. Is the the thing that we mentioned in the beginning. Why do you want to do this? Is it something that do you want to give something back to the community? Fantastic. Do you want to do this to gain more clients or more business? Then you got to really think very carefully about what kind of podcast you're going to create, and especially what audience you're trying to attract. Like, let's say, for instance, if you're a wedding photographer, creating a podcast about wedding photography is not necessarily, or teaching how to do wedding photography is not going to be of interest to potential future brides and grooms. At that point, you need to create something that is of value to that particular audience, because these are the people you're trying to attract as clients. So, creating a podcast around wedding planning, for example, makes a lot more sense. Maybe you have guests on that come, broadly speaking, from the area of everything that's got anything to do with wedding planning, wedding planners, cake makers, whatever they're called, venues, florists, all that kind of stuff, the kind of stuff, all of the stuff you need to make a wedding happen. Again, you're building your own position as an expert in the industry, and you're more likely to find potential future clients that way. But again, it's the why that's important. If you have clarity about why you're doing this, it's easier to stay consistent, and it's easier to push through these walls, that are constantly trying to stop you from doing something.
Very good.
Cool. And then we talked a lot kind of about making a podcast style of thing. And then do you have thoughts on using YouTube just as a photographer, as a general promotion tool, making one-off videos, using for that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if you're a stills photographer in 2025 and you're not looking into video, you are going to be at the back of the line. There is no question.
Do you mean video for your marketing or video for your clients? Or
both? Both.
Right.
I'm telling you, since the pandemic, so we're in 2025 right now. The pandemic is 5 years back, but since the pandemic, in my business, video has increased massively. I'm being asked to make video projects a lot more regularly now than certainly pre-pandemic. A lot of the time, the projects I'm working on are basically hybrid projects. Where there's video and stills photography required. And of course, if you're doing stills photography, given the fact that you have to promote yourself and your own business across social media, video rules across all social media platforms. So therefore, you're constantly thinking, okay, what kind of behind the scenes footage can I create that I can then use as marketing collateral when I'm promoting myself or my business to other clients? And, it's the need for that is so vital in 2025 that if you're not looking into video, you are going to lose out. AI is not the threat right now. It's actually, in a sense, to stills photographers in many ways, the ability to, or the inability to embrace video is much more of a threat than AI is.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so just kind of, in some ways, get over yourself a bit, get on with it. It's not like the photography's evil twin. It's kind of just part of the business, and it's kind of part of what's needed nowadays.
The funny thing about this is, when I speak at camera clubs, for example, this is one of the things, I'm a great proponent when it comes to video. When I was a kid, I started with video. I come from a family of stills photographers, and I used to rebel when I was a kid, because I wanted to make a movie like Star Wars. I used to think like, back in the 80s even, I used to think like stills photography, nobody's going to look at still photos in the future, because it was all about movies. Little did I know. But I talked to an audience of stills photographers, and it occurs to me that every single person sitting in the audience is holding a camera that is a lot more powerful than any of the for video than any of the video cameras I used to have when I started out, in the 80s. So you've got the tools. Video is, if you know photography and you know lighting and exposure and all the rest of it, you're 80% there. If you know how to tell a story in one frame, all you have to do is expand that over time. Now with video, you're able to tell a story over time. It's not a major leap to go from stills photography to video. The rules of exposure are exactly the same. The rules of lighting are the same. The rules of storytelling are the same. It's just, you're just telling a story over time. It's actually not that difficult. The learning curve is a lot less steep than people think. And like I said, for your
presumably,
business,
actually, telling story over time is easier than trying to compress it into one single moment.
It is.
You've got the voice, and you've got,
yeah,
it's easier in some ways rather than harder.
it gives you, it gives you additional creative opportunities as well, because when you tell a story over time, you can you can confuse the viewer. You can lay false traps, and
it's a different. Yeah, it's. I think a photograph is more of a fixed viewpoint, isn't it? I mean, there's no truth in photography, but there's more truth than there is in making a movie, in a film narrative. Sorry.
Yeah, you can, because you can make somebody think one way, and then all of a sudden you just
change it, and you can switch it.
Yeah, and and you can reveal things. It's a fun, from a creative perspective. I think it's a fun medium. But like I said, from a marketing and from a business perspective, it's very, very difficult, or it's going to be increasingly more difficult to promote your own business without video. In 2025 and in the future.
Nicely, yeah.
Okay, amazing. We are running out of time, aren't we? Unfortunately, yes. But as Marcus mentioned earlier, we are now on YouTube. So if you really want to, you can come and watch us. So yes, head over to the new YouTube channel. The link will be in the show notes. Come and follow, and you can get all of the new shows on video when they come out, as well as listening. Kirsten, thank you so much for being with us. Been a really, really interesting show. And Marcus, I'll see you next week.
See you next week, Sam. And thank you very much, Kirsten. Been a pleasure having you on.
It's been an absolute pleasure.